and welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to quickly explain the optional class features provided by Tasha's Cauldron of Everything for the fighter class. If you did not see the video where I explain what those optional class features are, I highly recommend watching that video before you watch this one, as it will cover the basics of what types of optional features there are and go over some of the terms I will use in this video. And to ensure that you have quick access to that video, I've made sure to link it in the description below. Now, the fighter class gains two features that are considered optional features, and one that is classified as a retraining feature, in my opinion. However, one of those optional features is really only useful for the fighter subclasses that have the ability to use maneuvers, so this means it will only affect those characters and not all fighters. Whereas the other optional feature does affect all fighters, as does the retraining feature. The first enhancement feature is called Fighting Style, which matches the same name of the existing feature called Fighting Style, but is labeled with the option tag at the end of the name. This feature is gained at level 1 and grants you additional fighting styles that were not available up until the release of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. These styles include Blind Fighting, Interception, Superior Technique, Thrown Weapon Fighting, and Unarmed Fighting, all of which we will cover in a moment. It should be stated, though, that this is the feature that is accessible to all fighter classes, no matter which subclass a character has taken. So this one you're going to want to take a closer look at because it theoretically could unlock one of the other new features. Now let's go ahead and take a look at each of the new fighting styles. The first is called Blind Fighting Style, and the fighter gains the ability to see almost any creature who's within 10 feet of the character, unless they are behind total cover or have managed to succeed in hiding from your character through some form of stealth capability. This means your character will not suffer a disadvantage attack when they are inside of a globe of darkness, have been blinded in some way, or the target is invisible but failed to successfully hide from you. However, your character will still suffer disadvantage when they attempt to attack someone who has managed to successfully hide. However, in this case, instead of actually setting this up inside of our Actions tab and creating an effect, it makes more sense to simply make use of the advantage and disadvantage buttons down here. If the Dungeon Master is going to call for a disadvantage attack, you will have to remind them that you have the blind fighting capability. If they state that you will still have to suffer a disadvantage attack, you simply click this, because it generally means that the target you're attacking managed to successfully hide from your character. But if they state, oh, you are correct, then you don't have to click any of these buttons here at all. However, if the Dungeon Master has already applied a disadvantage effect on your character, or you have a disadvantage effect already in place, you can potentially click on the advantage button here to cancel that out, as long as the target that you are attacking falls under the conditions defined within the blind fighting description. However, if for some reason you are under the effect of a disadvantage roll, due to something other than blindness or in total darkness, you will not be able to make use of the advantage button here to cancel that disadvantage out, because chances are it's being applied by a different spell effect of some kind or some other effect that you managed to suffer. As for the Interception fighting style, it will allow your fighter character to intervene in combat if someone they see who is within 5 feet of your character has been hit. Your character will be able to make use of their reaction, provided you have a reaction available, in an attempt to reduce the amount of damage that that target is going to take as a result of that hit. And the reduction will be roughly 1d10 plus the fighter's proficiency bonus. However, in order for this fighting style to work, your character must be either wielding a shield, a simple weapon, or a martial weapon of some kind. Because there is an effect that's going to be coming into play to be able to reduce the amount of damage that your intercepted target, if you will, is going to be taking, we need to create an action entry for this particular feature. So we're going to drag and drop this into the Actions tab, and I'm going to go through and set up this grouping. Now, some of these may come into play a little bit later on. I'm not sure why that one is empty, so I'm going to delete that, but for now I'll leave the other two. I'm going to move this down into the fighter group, because that's where it makes the most sense, and I'm going to create a brand new effect, simply by creating an effect. And in case you're curious, all I did is I right-clicked to pop open this radial menu, and I did so on a line that is anywhere within the words fighting style option here, as well as the last line down here. It will still work. Once I clicked that arrow, I simply clicked on this particular icon here, and it gave me this empty effect option. Once you have the effect opened up, and all you do is you click on this little magnifying glass, you're going to want to go and set up this entry here. It's fighting style in brackets interception, and that's to tell the dungeon master exactly where this particular effect is coming from. DMG, oh, and there's a semicolon there, sorry. DMG colon minus 1d10. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. The tricky part is how do we add the additional proficiency bonus when it comes to the damage reduction? You would immediately think that you could do something like this. But that would actually be incorrect. And the reason for that is that as far as Fantasy Grounds is concerned, this portion of the effect isn't parsable. Not sure why, but through testing that I've done, it is definitely showing up as something that isn't parsable. What you actually need to do is do something like this. You need to make sure that the minus symbol is inside of the square brackets. If you don't do that, the effect that you're trying to acquire here won't work the way that you expect it will. And I actually had to go back to the Fantasy Grounds developers to confirm that was the case, because I initially thought that a subtraction between the 10 and the bracket was where the negative symbol was supposed to be, but it's actually supposed to be on the inside. Yeah, you learn something every day. So let me explain what's happening here. The minus 1d10 portion of the effect is being rolled through a die roll whenever you have the creature in question make their attack and do their damage. The section that's within the bracket, the minus PRF, and in case you can't see those characters, that's what it is, stands for proficiency. And we're telling it to subtract an additional number of points equal to the character's proficiency. So if you're level 1 when you initially get this, it will be 2 points. But if you're level 20, like the character is here that we have in this particular example, it will be 6 points. So essentially, you will have a grand total of minus 7 through to 16 points of damage, potentially coming off the total damage dealt to a particular target. But if the total damage done is smaller than the amount of damage being reduced, the effect will end up being simply canceling out all of the damage, and the character will receive 0 damage. There won't be any quote-unquote negative damage done, meaning they wouldn't get any hit points back. So how does this actually work when it comes to a combat scenario? Well, the character in question, in this case the Battlemaster, is going to be making use of a reaction. And let's say that in this particular case, the succubus attacks either the ape or the bard or the wolf that's here. The fighter then decides to react and try to intercept and reduce that damage. This is what's going to happen. First off, the succubus is going to make their attack. And they currently have nobody targeted, so let's go ahead and target the bard. And in this particular case, they have hit. You can see that right there. Now what's going to happen is the fighter is going to react and apply the effect to the succubus to prevent that succubus from doing any damage, if at all possible. I can already point out that this is going to work the way that we're expecting it to, because we have already got a parsing of the -6 in this particular case, meaning that it has already figured out what the fighter or the Battlemaster's proficiency bonus is and applied it to this calculation. Now all we have to worry about is what is the result of this damage roll going to be. Well, in order for us to see that, the succubus actually has to do the damage that they were going to do. And as you can see, there were 2 die that were rolled there. The 1d6 was the damage, and the succubus does 1d6 plus 3 for this particular attack. But you can see that we have done 0 damage. And the reason that has happened is because the succubus has received a -7 penalty when it came to the amount of damage that they were going to deal through the die roll. Subtract the -6 on top of that, and that gives you a -13 on the total amount of damage being reduced. That brings the amount of damage being dealt to the bard to 0 because it was greater than the amount of damage that was being dealt as the damage side of it. So that you can actually see what this looked like on the DM screen, I've taken a screenshot and dragged it over. The first portion of this is where the effect is being added. Kind of hard to see the cursor, but anyway. The second portion here, the longer calculation, if you will, is where the damage was rolled and then the effects were rolled, giving us a total subtraction. Even though the math being displayed here doesn't actually completely line up with the overall results, it does work out. And as we can see, 0 damage was dealt to the bard. Additionally, when the succubus rolled the damage that they were going to do to the bard, the effect itself automatically applied itself to the damage and then dropped from the succubus. So it's no longer sitting around in relation to any further attacks that that succubus is going to try to make, because it's related to a reaction the fighter is taking to block that little bit of damage from the attack that was just executed by the succubus. So let's move on to the superior technique style. In this particular case, your fighter is able to now choose a maneuver from the Battlemaster subclass or any other subclass that happens to have maneuvers that are now available. And this will apply even if your character is not of the Battlemaster subclass. And this is where I stated that the fighting style might be able to unlock access to the maneuver options feature that we'll get to once we go through the fighting styles. This means that your character is going to be able to gain the use of a superiority die for that maneuver, which in this particular case is going to be a d6 and can be added in combination with other superiority die that the character already has, if they already make use of them. So in this particular example, because our fighter is a Battlemaster, we will now have one extra d6 superiority die that is now available to us. But there is a usage restriction when it comes to this particular superiority die, or the maneuver in question. Once your character has used the maneuver and the superiority die as a result of that maneuver, your character is going to have to complete a short or a long rest in order for your character to be able to use it again. But there is something that you're going to want to keep in mind. If your character does not normally have access to superiority dice, nor do they have access to maneuvers, choosing a maneuver that might use more than one superiority die, if they exist, would be problematic because you'd never be able to use that maneuver. You're only getting one superiority die as part of this particular fighting style. Additionally, if your character somehow manages to gain the ability of adding an additional fighting style to your class, either through a feat or through some form of leveling through one of the subclasses, you will not be able to make use of this particular fighting style again. You will have to choose a different fighting style. Then that's just generally because of how fighting styles work, in the sense that when you select a fighting style, you cannot use that fighting style again. You have to choose a second one if you're going to be able to make use of another one. So if your character is not a Battlemaster, it means they're not going to be able to access the ability that provides access to the maneuvers. To get to it, you're going to want to go to the classes and make sure that you choose the player handbook version of the fighter class sheet. Once you've opened that up, you're then going to want to go down to the Battlemaster class specialization. Maneuvers are buried underneath this combat superiority feature, and these are the various features that are available. If you want to see how this is all set up, I highly recommend you go watch the Battlemaster video that I've already published and is available within my channel. I will be sure to provide a link to that video within the description below. And what that video will do is explain how to set up the combat superiority feature as well as the various maneuvers within it so that you can go through and make use of those that are defined there. I will add the ones that are in the maneuver options additional feature here in this particular video in order to be able to show you how those maneuvers can be set up. And finally, before we actually go through and show you an example of a maneuver, it should be noted that if a maneuver is chosen that will require a target to make a given saving throw, that target will have to make a saving throw against your character's strength or dexterity modifier as part of the actual DC check. So generally it's 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus an ability modifier. Well, that ability modifier, you get to choose whether it's strength or your dexterity. But once you make that choice, it's set. You don't get to choose it again because you're setting it at the time that you're creating that maneuver entry. For the purposes of a quick demonstration, however, I'm going to show you how to set up the precision attack maneuver within your Actions tab. Now you may have noticed that I already have the combat superiority set up here with all of the various effects in place. I'm not going to show you how to go through and set up all of those again. I'm just going to show you how to set up the precision attack. For the purposes of this demonstration, because it's not going to be associated with the Battlemaster for this particular superiority die, I'm going to drag a new copy of Combat Superiority into place, but this time I'm going to set it up under a Maneuvers group. And that guarantees that if your character is in fact a Battlemaster, it will separate that out from this particular grouping. And I'll set it up down here. And there is a very specific reason that I have done this. Typically, when your character is a Battlemaster, the superiority dice do eventually increase. So in this particular case, they're D8s. We don't get a D8 for this particular feature. We only get a D6, and that is right here. So we want to make sure that we actually intentionally separate out the Battlemaster's combat superiority actions from the maneuver that you have chosen that's going to be D6 based as opposed to D8 based. And that's the reason why I've set it up as an entirely different group. And the other reason is that when you set it up in the Battlemaster grouping here as per the previous video, you might have decided to use your strength as opposed to your dexterity. But let's say that their dexterity is good enough to be able to use for this. You may want to set up this particular group to make use of dexterity as opposed to strength. Now I'm not for this particular case because this character's strength actually doesn't really matter. They are both equal. So I will set this up for the dexterity. And I'm going to go back to there. Now, none of these particular effects are going to be used by this particular maneuver, not for the precision attack maneuver. In this particular case, we want to set it up so that when we attack a particular creature or target, we want to be able to add the D6 superiority die roll to that attack roll as or before we are making the attack roll. So I'm going to clear out all of these and delete that effect, delete that effect, and delete this effect. And I'm going to add a brand new effect. And what that effect is going to be is something called precision attack. Precision attack, semicolon, provided I spell attack correctly, semicolon, ATK, colon, D6. And it's always going to be on you, and it will always expire on your next roll if you're going to be using Fantasy Grounds to manage this. If you're just simply using pen and paper, you just roll a D6 and add the value if you choose to. With Fantasy Grounds, the assumption is that you're going to be adding it before you actually make your attack roll, which counters this kind of last statement here, if you will. But a Dungeon Master would theoretically be able to allow you to just simply drag a D6 into here, roll your dice, and you're going to be adding 6 to your attack roll. So it's entirely up to you as to how you want to use it. This effect allows you to do it before you make your attack roll, and if you don't choose to use it here, you can simply roll the dice manually. But in either case, we have to set up the next restriction, if you will, when it comes to this particular maneuver, is that you have to have a short or a long rest in order to be able to regain the use of this maneuver. Well, we want to flip this to preparation and set up the one use for a rest, and that takes care of both a short and long rest. Now, granted, combat superiority up here does in fact make use of the same kind of quote-unquote restrictions on rest usage, but because of the other reasons, we've decided to separate it out. And that's all you have to set up for the combat maneuver. But how do you use it? Well, while you're in the combat tracker, before you actually attack, so let's say I'm going to attack the succubus with this particular fighter, before I actually make that attack roll, I can click this effect, and it will automatically apply it to your character. Then I make the attack roll with this case. Let's do this in two-handed. So we saw that we had a d6 and a d20 rolled. I have a total attack point of 22, which means I hit that particular character. Now, the superiority die here didn't really add a whole lot. Not a surprise. It's a 1d6. It can be a 1 or it can be a 6 or anything in between. But it still is going to be helpful because that 1 point might be the difference between a hit or a miss. So let's now move on to the thrown weapon fighting style. And what this gives your fighter the means to do is to both draw and throw a weapon they intend to use for their attack against a target who is within range of that particular weapon. So in the case of our character here that we're using as an example, this character has 2 hand axes. Well, those hand axes could be sheathed in an area around the belt, in a particular pocket within a jacket or a coat, or the armor in some way, shape, or form. Doesn't much matter as long as it is relatively accessible. The Dungeon Master should permit you to be able to both draw those weapons and throw the weapons in question. I have no idea why, but I literally just made a throwing gesture. You can't see me. What's the point? No. Additionally, if those weapons manage to successfully hit the target in question, those weapons will do an additional 2 points of damage. So we're going to want to make sure that we set that up in the Actions tab. As we already have a fighting style entry here, we don't need to drag and drop a new one into there, but we do want to make sure that we add an additional effect here. Now, the weapon... Okay, so we just want to add a new effect that's going to give us plus 2 points of damage. So let's add an action, add an effect. This is going to be thrown weapon fighting. Semicolon DMG 2. It's going to be on you and will expire on the next roll. And all you have to do when you actually go in and make an attack with the hand axes, so let's say I attack this succubus, I'm going to throw a hand axe here. You'll see that it will tag one as being used. That is a hit. Before I roll the actual damage, I'm going to want to make sure that I apply this effect to myself, and then roll the damage, and we should see an additional 2 points of damage here. Which we do, because the hand axe is doing a plus 5 points of damage there, but we have plus 7 as the bonus. That means that our plus 2 did in fact get added, and it disappeared from our combat tracker, showing that it was used. And finally, in relation to the unarmed fighting style, your fighter can add 1d6 or 1d8 points of damage to their attack when using unarmed attacks. And I'll explain why it's an or situation there. And it all comes down to whether your character is wielding any weapons. So let's say that you have a sword in your right hand, and then you're going to make a bonus attack with an unarmed strike using your fist with your left hand. When you hit with that particular fist, the damage that you will do is equal to 1d6 plus your character's strength modifier against that particular target. You still do the normal damage that you would usually do with your sword. Now, of course, this assumes that when you hit with your fist, the target is not resistant or immune to bludgeoning damage. However, if your character isn't wielding any weapons, and you're not carrying a shield of any kind, then when you make that unarmed attack, your character will roll a d8 die as opposed to a d6, increasing the amount of damage that you can do. There is one more benefit to this particular fighting style. If your character is able to grapple and hold on to a particular creature or target, and you're able to hang on to them over the course of multiple turns, each turn that you retain that grapple, you can do an additional 1d4 points of bludgeoning damage to your creature, or to the target that you have grappled, at the start of each of your turns. So let's say that you have grappled a thief that happened to be stealing something, and they're continuing to struggle to break that grapple, but they don't manage to do so over the course of four or five turns. Well, what your character could be doing is every single time that your turn starts, you could just simply be smacking them inside of the head or on the shoulder, or on the back, somewheres with your fist, and that's when that bludgeoning damage would be applied. Now, this is definitely something that we're going to want to make sure is applied to our actions tab. But here's the benefit to us. Both the 1d6 and the 1d4 bludgeoning damages done by this particular unarmed strike and this particular unarmed strike during the grapple are already added to the actual fighting style. We don't need to do anything. The only thing that we need to add is if your character is going to make an unarmed strike without holding any weapons or shields. And that's going to change from a d6 to a d8. So I'm going to create a new damage effect. And that is going to be this little blood drop here, or water drop, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to add a new damage, and I'm going to drag in a d8 dice. And then I'm going to make sure that the dexterity in this particular case, although actually no, I'm going to do strength. So let's just leave it at, takes a little while. There. And the damage type is going to be bludgeoning. And that aligns with everything else. So if for some reason you have been disarmed of all of your weapons, you can now make use of 1d8 points of damage as opposed to the 1d6. In this way, you don't have to worry about trying to futz around with going around and adding the information to your actions tab after the fact. It's already there, it's ready to go. And believe it or not, that brings us to all of the additional fighting styles that the fighter gains through this option acquired through Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. The next feature is going to be gained at level 3 and is called Maneuver Options. This is the feature that I was explaining earlier that is only really going to be applicable if your character has the ability to make use of maneuvers. Whether you decided to take the feature from the fighting style that gives you a maneuver to be able to use, or whether your character is of a subclass that is able to actively utilize maneuvers, such as the Battlemaster like we have in our example, then this skill becomes applicable, or this feature becomes applicable. For all other characters that don't make use of the maneuvers capabilities, this becomes useless and won't be of any benefit to you at all. There are, however, a total of 8 new maneuvers that your character can make use of. They are Ambush, Bait and Switch, Brace, Commanding Presence, Grappling Strike, Quick Toss, and Tactical Assessment. However, because I've only really covered the class and subclasses associated with the fighter from the player's handbook at the time of this particular recording, I don't know if there are any additional subclasses that can make use of the maneuvers groupings that come from the Battlemaster, or whether they have their own maneuvers. So you'll want to go ahead and do a little bit of research on that. But I have gone ahead and provided the link in the description below this video for the Battle Class Fighter, showing you how to add maneuvers to your particular character. If you have not watched that video yet, and you are making use of a Battlemaster class character, I recommend you go watch that video first before you continue on with the rest of this particular video. However, I am going to go over each of these new maneuvers here and cover each of them in detail so that you understand what they do. In relation to the ambush maneuver, your character can add 1 superiority die value, if you will, to a dexterity-based stealth check or to your character's initiative. as long as your character is not incapacitated. This means that as long as your character has available superiority die, they can improve their DC or initiative by adding the total value from that superiority die roll to the total of the dice check or the initiative. When we go and add this to our character sheet, there's going to be two scenarios. If you're playing a Battlemaster, you're going to want to add each of these maneuvers to your existing combat superiority feature that you already have added to your actions tab. And that's simply because these maneuvers, if you will, are going to make use of the total number of superiority die that you have linked to this particular feature. But if you have created a character that is not a Battlemaster or does not have maneuvers by default, but is gaining the maneuver through the fighting style, you're going to want to add it to this particular combat superiority entry, utilizing a D6 for its actual superiority die, whereas the ones that are in this particular combat superiority entry are going to be using the D8 capability that this character has. So let's go ahead and expand out this particular Battlemaster. And as you can see, I have quite a few in here, simply because of where I added them when I went through and created this character. And it looks like this particular character actually is using 1d12 for their superiority die. So I do suspect, and yes, I do recall now, that superiority die do increase with the Battlemaster when it comes to the actual die roll that you're going to be doing. So when I set this up, I'm going to be making sure that I use the d12, not the d8 that would have been there by default. So let's create a new empty effect. And it should drop here at the bottom. Excellent. I'm going to call this ambush, semicolon, to go with the rest of the effects that we had selected in the past. And it's going to be 1d12 in this character's case. And we want this to be for a skill check. So we want a skill, semicolon, comma, stealth. Oops. And we also want it to have the initiative modifier. So that will be an init, colon, 1d12. This will be on your character, so it's going to be self, and it will expire on the next roll. So if we make the stealth check or if we make the initiative roll, it should go away. Let's see what happens. So right now, our Battlemaster doesn't have an initiative. So let's add this effect to our character, as it is their turn for the moment. And just for kicks, let's roll an initiative roll and see what happens. And that is on your main page here, and just double click it. And we have an 18 plus 3, which is our d12 roll, gives us an initiative roll of 31. We have also noticed that the effect has gone away. Excellent. That works when it comes to the initiative roll. Let's go back and add the effect again, but this time let's make a stealth check. Now, this character is wearing armor, which is why it rolled 2 d20 die rolls, because the armor itself has a stealth penalty. You can see that right here. But we did get the d12 superiority die roll here, giving us a total of a 31 for its total value when you take into account the bonuses. Sadly, we dropped a 20 because of the disadvantage roll. But oh well, we still got a pretty high dexterity check. And you should also notice that the effect has gone away. Excellent. That means this feature is set up the way that we need it to for the ambush maneuver. The next maneuver, which is called bait and switch, is an interesting one because it allows your character to essentially switch places with another creature who happens to be within 5 feet of your character. The only cost is that you will spend one of your superiority die and 5 feet of your character's movement. The trick is that the creature that you're attempting to switch places with has to be willing to make that swap. So it can't be an enemy character of some kind, because chances are they're not going to be willing, unless you have a very weird relationship with that particular target. But generally it implies that you're going to be switching places with one of your party members. And it does not matter if they have any movement left or if they've already gone through and used their turn or not. They just have to be conscious and otherwise not incapacitated and willing to do the swap. When the switch occurs, you will then have to roll a superiority die and add that value to the total AC of your own character or to the creature that you just swap places with. It's entirely up to you. And that effect is going to remain in place until the start of your next turn. This means we need to add the new effect to our Actions tab, specifically to our Combat Superiority feature. Now, adding the effect is relatively easy. We've seen this before. So we just right-click, add action, add an effect. We then want to call this bait and switch. Oops. But there is a problem here. The AC effect does not take a die roll into account. So you can't simply go 1d8 or 1d12 or 1d6 if you're using the fighting style maneuver. You actually have to roll the dice at the time you're going to apply the effect. And the die that you roll is going to be entirely based on the level of your character. If you're relatively low level and you are a Battlemaster, you can be rolling a 1d8. At later levels, you might be rolling a 1d10, and at even later levels, you might be rolling a 1d12. If you're simply utilizing the maneuver fighting style and have chosen bait and switch as the maneuver that you are taking, you'll be doing a 1d6 roll here. But as I said, you won't be doing the roll here. What you'll end up doing is at the time that you're expending the superiority dice, you will pick up whichever die is required. In the character case here, it will be a d12. You're going to roll that dice and then add the value that comes up as the value that gets added here. Now, when you actually go and use it, and let's say that our fighter just swapped positions with this ape, and the fighter wants the AC bonus, now what will happen is that the AC bonus will come into play such that when the succubus attacks, there will be a defense bonus in play here, and the AC4 will be added to that total bonus. And we can see within the screenshot that when the succubus attacked, they rolled an 11. Well, there's also an effect bonus that has come into play here, forcing it to miss. So, what does that mean for you as a player? Well, what it means is that any time you're going to use the bait and switch maneuver, you will have to manually re-roll a die and modify the effect. So let's say we're 3 turns down the road. I now roll this dice again. I'm about to apply it. So in this case, it's going to be a 6. Now I go ahead and I apply the effect. Now in this case, I'm going to apply it to the 8. Maybe we need to give that particular character a little bit of an AC bonus. Now they have a +6 to their armor class for the duration of the fighter's turn. That's how that works. The brace maneuver allows your fighter to use a reaction, if they have any left, to attack a creature that happens to move into the reach of your currently wielded melee weapon. And yes, it is specifically a melee-based weapon. Generally, this is going to be approximately 5 feet long, but some weapons are a little bit longer, so you're going to want to double check the reach of the weapon that you're using. Regardless, as they pass within that reach, you can utilize your reaction and initiate an attack. And yes, this is the opposite of an attack of opportunity, although technically it is an attack of opportunity through the maneuver, because they are moving into your ability to hit them, not moving away from your ability to hit them. So you're reacting to that particular opportunity, if you will. However, normally a character is not going to be able to do this, because moving into somebody's sphere of influence, if you will, doesn't provoke an attack as a regular reaction. This particular maneuver is giving you that ability. However, this will cost you a superiority die, but if you do hit the target, you will be able to add that die roll to the total amount of damage dealt, which means we need to add this to our Actions tab. So let's go ahead and set up another effect. In this case, we're going to call it Brace, semicolon, and it's going to be DMG 1D12 for this particular character's example. Again, depending on the level of your character, it can be a 1D8, 1D10, or 1D12 if you're a Battlemaster or another variant that has the ability to make use of maneuvers. However, if you are utilizing a fighting style maneuver, it's going to be a D6, so make sure you use the appropriate die roll here. It is going to be on yourself, and it's going to expire on the next roll. Now, in the case of a combat scenario, let's say that the succubus has just moved into your reach. You can initiate a reaction by attacking that particular creature. So let's go ahead and do so. That is a hit. Before I actually roll the damage, what I want to do is make sure that the brace effect is in place. Now when I go ahead and actually roll this damage with the longsword, for example, and I'm using it two-handed in this particular case, you can see that the effect went away and we had an additional 7 points of damage added to the total damage. And that's what this purple dice is here. That's the superiority die having been rolled. The next maneuver is called Commanding Presence. And in this particular case, your fighter can add the total value of a superiority die to an intimidation, performance, or persuasion check, which should be relatively easy to set up as an effect. So what we want to do here is create another new effect, modify this, we're going to call it Commanding Presence, semicolon, and in this particular case we want to set up a skill effect, 1d12. In this character's particular case, again, it's going to be a d8, d10, d12, depending on the level of the Battlemaster, or a d6 if this is a maneuver that has been chosen through the fighting style maneuver selection. And we want intimidation, performance, or persuasion. And I think these actually have to be connected to each other. They can't be spaces in order for it to chain all of the skills that we want to be able to make use of. So let's see if this actually works. So once again, back in the combat tracker, let's say that our fighter has to make an intimidation check against this succubus. So I'm going to apply the effect to the wrong character. Forgot to mention that it's going to be self and on next roll. So now let's apply that to our character. Go over to our skills tab here and make an intimidation check. As you can see, we rolled a d12. Now we only had a +1 bonus there. Let's go back to our actions tab and add this effect back into place. And then go make a persuasion check. Where is it here? Here we go. Excellent. It is working. So in the case of all of these features, and we'll do a performance check next. Performance. There we go. The effect is both going away from our character and successfully rolling a d12 as part of that process. So let's move on to the grappling strike maneuver. And this is going to allow your fighter to attempt to grapple a creature as a bonus action as per the normal rules of the handbook, the player's handbook specifically. If you're unsure of what those rules are, you can go to the library, open up the player's handbook module as long as you have it loaded, go to the reference guide, and look for making an attack. And this one here is the one that we want. Near the bottom of this page, in Fantasy Grounds anyway, you will see a grappling section, and you want to go through and read these rules. For those of you who have a physical copy of the book, it happens to be on or near page 195, depending on the edition of the book that you have. So as per the rules, when you attempt to grapple a particular target, your character is going to have to make a strength athletics-based check. They're also going to have to make an athletics or acrobatics check against the roll that you roll. So this means that we need to add an effect to our character in order to execute the athletics check, because the total superiority die roll needs to be added to that check. This means we need to make sure that we create a new effect here. So let's create another effect. It is going to be a skill-based effect again. So let's move this over here. This is going to be Grappling Strike, semicolon, skill, and it is going to be athletics. 1d12, comma, athletics. And it's going to be on yourself, and it will expire on the next roll. So just prior to your character actually making the grapple strike, you'll want to make sure the effect is in place. Then you will go over to your skills tab and roll your athletics check. And as we can see, the d12 rolls and the effect goes away. So the target will have to counter a 29 DC roll. Excellent. That's working the way that we want it. So let's move on to the next maneuver. The quick toss maneuver allows your character to take a bonus action, making use of a superiority die roll, and use that to make a ranged based attack with any weapon that has the thrown property, including drawing the weapon before it being tossed. This could include things like knives, daggers, and darts, as long as they have the thrown property. And the benefit here is that if it does in fact hit, the value of the superiority die will be added to the damage the target took. But you may have noticed that I did not use the plural reference here. And that's because most explosive type of weapons, such as grenades or bombs, which typically you would think could be thrown, don't actually have the thrown property. But things like knives, daggers, and darts do. And you can see that in our example here. In the case of the dart and the dagger, each of them has a thrown property entry. Whereas in relation to the smoke grenade or the fragmentation grenade, they don't. This means that you can't simply throw those grenades. Now granted, those grenades are probably used for a different kind of campaign that you're going to usually be running from within Fantasy Grounds or through D&D, but it doesn't mean that a goblin in a balloon isn't dropping or lobbing a grenade on top of your head. That's still possible to do, but you simply can't pick it up and throw it. But what this means to me is that the specificity with which they have indicated the thrown property requirement is intentionally done to restrict the kind of weapon that can be thrown. So be careful in relation to using specific kinds of weapons, as the DM might have the right to claw back any damage done if you used a weapon that didn't have that particular property and they really weren't interested in allowing you to actually make use of a weapon that didn't have that property. We will, however, need to add this as an effect. Now, theoretically, it could be argued that we already have a damage bonus right here that you could theoretically make use of, except it would be a bit misleading if it enters the chat log here. So let's go to Quick Toss, semicolon, it'll be DMG 1d12 in the case of this particular character, on self and on next roll. That way, if this particular character happens to have an item that has a thrown property, which I believe the hand axes up here do. Yep, they do. Then theoretically, what I can do is make the attack roll with one of those axes. So let's just make sure I have them available. Make the attack roll. Oh, look at that. I hit. Excellent. I'm now going to add the superiority die roll to the damage of a 1d6 based hand axe, potentially doing more than 1 point of damage. Not so in this particular case, but you see the point. Now the last maneuver that is new is called Tactical Assessment, and this maneuver allows your fighter to add a superiority die roll to the dice check of an investigation, history, or insight check that you're being required to make. And as we've seen with some of the other effects that we've added, such as commanding performance, it's relatively easy to take care of. So we want to make sure that we pop this open. It will be tactical assessment. Tactical assessment, yep. Semicolon. And it will be a skill check, colon, 1d12. Once again, the die is going to be specific to your character's level. And then it will be the investigation, comma, history, comma, insight as our skill checks. It will be on yourself and will go away on the next roll. So let's go ahead and add this effect to our character. And then quickly pop back and roll an investigation check to make sure that it works. Excellent. That would be a d12. Make sure that one of the other skill checks here, so history. Awesome. So this is going to work for all three of those particular features, or skills, I should say. And the last one was insight. This could be a nasty number. Yeah, 21, not too bad. But in any event, this does confirm that this particular maneuver is working. And that completes everything that we need to deal with when it comes to the maneuvers. The last feature that is available through the fighter's class that has been provided by Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is called Martial Versatility, and it will initially be gained at level 4. You might say, wait, what, initially? That's correct, because you could potentially also use it again at levels 6, 8, 12, 14, 16, and 19 in case of the fighter. This is because fighters actually gain 2 more ability score improvements than other classes do, whereas most classes gain ability score improvements at levels 4, 8, 12, 16, and 19. A fighter also gains them at levels 6 and 14. This feature is classified as a retraining feature because it is applied whenever the character gains an ability score improvement feature, hence why it is usable at the levels previously mentioned. What this feature does is it allows your character to replace their existing fighting style or maneuver every time your character requires an ability score improvement, essentially removing the locking in, if you will, of a given fighting style or of a given maneuver. It's entirely possible that your playstyle might evolve as you continue to use that particular character, and you might find that the fighting style you chose at level 1 is no longer applicable to the way that you're now executing combat. And the same could be said with maneuvers, specifically allowing you to change the one you selected at level 3 for another one that you might find a little bit more useful. But this in and itself doesn't require setup within the Actions tab. All you're going to be doing is going through and potentially making use of one of these other maneuvers that we have set up here in this massively large combat superiority feature, if you will, or being able to swap out the fighting style that you have chosen when you first created your character. And lastly, you will still have access to the default retraining options available through Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. For instance, if you decide to change a skill proficiency or even your entire subclass, you will end up using those default rules provided by Tasha's Cauldron of Everything to handle those particular changes. However, features specific to fighting styles and maneuvers have to be covered by the Martial Versatility feature acquired through Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, so they no longer fall under the default rules because they're now defined as part of this particular feature. To understand how that works, I highly recommend watching the introduction video where I explain what optional features are as I explain it there. And to help you out, I've included a link in the description below. In conclusion, it's nice to see that the fighter class has now gained several new fighting styles and maneuvers to give you a little bit more variety, if you will, in how you play your character that you've now created. And additionally, because of the level of flexibility that is now in place for being able to swap out your fighting styles or your maneuvers, it's going to allow you as a player to make those adjustments to your character as your playstyle evolves. It just means that you'll enjoy your character a little bit more. However, this does bring us to the end of this particular video. I want to thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.